In October 1993, the streets of Mogadishu erupted into one of the most brutal modern battles. What began as a daring U.S. mission to capture Somali warlords quickly spiraled into chaos. Black Hawk helicopters fell from the sky, American soldiers were trapped, and fierce firefights raged through the city. Surrounded, outnumbered, and fighting for survival, their courage would be tested in ways the world had never seen. This is not just a story of war, it is a story of sacrifice, endurance, and the battle that changed U.S. foreign policy forever. Welcome to the Battle of Mogadishu. In 1991, the East African nation of Somalia collapsed into chaos. The dictatorship of Siad Barre crumbled, leaving behind a power vacuum no one could control. What followed was not a transition, but a descent into anarchy. Rival warlords carved the nation into fiefdoms, each armed with militias, each hungry for power. But power was not the only prize. With the collapse of order came famine on a catastrophic scale. Starvation swept across the country, claiming the lives of hundreds of thousands. Mothers buried their children, crops rotted in the fields, food became more valuable than gold. The world watched in horror. The United Nations stepped in, vowing to deliver aid. Massive shipments of food, medicine, and supplies meant to save lives. But the convoys never reached the people. Militias intercepted the aid, seizing it for themselves, or using it as a weapon to control starving clans. Soon, these warlords no longer targeted just their rivals. They began attacking UN forces directly. In one brutal ambush, 25 Pakistani peacekeepers were slaughtered in a single day. It was in this crucible of chaos and bloodshed that the United States entered Somalia, believing it could restore order and underestimating the storm it was about to face. By 1993, one man stood at the center of Somalia's chaos: Mohammed Farah Aidid. Ruthless, cunning, and backed by a powerful militia known as the Somali National Alliance, Aidid controlled much of Mogadishu. He defied the United Nations, seized food shipments, and made himself the most feared warlord in the country. To his followers, he was a hero. To the outside world, he was the face of Somalia's nightmare. The United States decided enough was enough. Washington launched Operation Gothic Serpent, a mission designed to cripple Aidid's power once and for all. The objective was clear: capture Aidid, dismantle his network, and restore some semblance of order to Somalia. At the heart of this effort stood Major General William Garrison, commander of America's most elite warriors. Under his command were the best soldiers the U.S. Army could field: the battle-hardened 75th Ranger Regiment and the shadowy, near-mythical Delta Force. These were not ordinary troops. They were the tip of the spear, trained for precision strikes, lightning raids, and impossible odds. The mission seemed simple on paper, but as history would soon prove, Somalia was no ordinary battlefield and Aidid was no ordinary enemy. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shock the world. To bring down Aidid, America would not send an army, it would send a scalpel, a small strike force of unparalleled skill. At the core was the 75th Ranger Regiment, young, disciplined, and relentless. Their mission? Hold the perimeter, control the streets, and provide the raw muscle for the assault. But inside that ring of steel were the ghosts, Delta Force. Officially, they did not exist. Unofficially, they were America's most secretive warriors, known simply as the D-Boys. These men specialized in lightning-fast raids, hostage rescues, and surgical strikes. To them, Mogadishu was just another battlefield. Supporting them was an aerial armada, 8 Black Hawk helicopters, codenamed Super 61 through Super 68, each carrying Rangers and Delta operators. Little bird gunships, small and deadly, would circle above like hawks ready to strike. Overhead, a spy plane scanned the city, feeding real-time intelligence to command. And on the ground, a convoy of Humvees stood ready to extract prisoners and troops. All told, fewer than 160 men would enter the heart of Mogadishu. To General Garrison, it was enough. These were the best soldiers America had. But in Somalia, numbers mattered less than chaos. and Mogadishu was chaos incarnate. The mission was as daring as it was simple. Intelligence revealed that two of Aidid's top lieutenants would be meeting near the Olympic Hotel in Mogadishu's Bakara Market, a district infamous for its hostility and militia presence. For General Garrison, this was the break he had been waiting for. The plan was straightforward. Delta Force would storm the target building, seize the men, and load them onto a waiting Humvee convoy. Meanwhile, the Rangers would fast rope from Black Hawks, securing every street corner and rooftop, sealing off the kill zone from all sides. Speed was the key. The operation was designed to last no more than an hour, in, out, and gone before the militias could mount a response. The code word was already chosen, Irene. When it was spoken, the skies above Mogadishu would roar to life. But Bakara Market was no ordinary battleground. Its alleys twisted like a maze, its rooftops bristled with armed men, and its people remembered every past raid, every bullet fired by foreign soldiers. This was Aidid's territory, his fortress in plain sight. Still, the Americans believed their speed, precision, and firepower would carry the day. They would soon learn how wrong they were. October 3rd, 1993. The rotors thundered over Mogadishu as the Black Hawks lifted into the sky. Over the radio came a single word: Irene. The mission was a go. From above, the city looked calm. But on the ground, Mogadishu was waking up, its narrow streets crawling with armed men, its rooftops alive with watchful eyes. The Americans were flying straight into a hornet's nest. As the Black Hawks hovered over their targets, Rangers began fast roping down to secure the perimeter. For most, it was flawless, swift, practiced, controlled. But then came a crack in the operation. Private First Class Todd Blackburn, just 18 years old, rushed down the rope too fast. His grip slipped. In a split second, he plummeted more than 60 feet, crashing onto the street below. His body twisted in agony, alive but broken. It was the first casualty of the mission, and it hadn't come from enemy fire. Already, precious minutes were lost as medics scrambled to evacuate him. And as the Rangers hit the ground, the real enemy emerged. Crowds surged in from every alleyway, rifles and RPGs in hand. Mogadishu was no longer quiet. The battle had begun, and it would not end quickly. The streets of Mogadishu erupted. Gunfire rained from rooftops, alleys, and windows as the militia swarmed in from every direction. The Rangers on the ground returned fire, but the volume was overwhelming. And then disaster struck from above. Super 61, a Black Hawk circling low to provide cover, became a target. From a nearby rooftop, a Somali fighter steadied an RPG. The missile streaked upward, slamming into the helicopter's tail rotor. Over the radio came the chilling words, 6-1, going down. The Black Hawk spun violently out of control, its massive frame twisting in the air before clipping a rooftop and smashing into the ground. The impact killed pilot Cliff Wolcott and co-pilot Donovan Briley instantly. The rest of the crew, dazed and bleeding, clawed their way out of the wreckage as smoke poured into the sky. For the militia, it was the moment they had been waiting for. Aidid's men rushed the crash site, eager to overwhelm the survivors. But the Rangers and Delta Force would not abandon their own. Troops broke from their positions, sprinting through a hail of bullets to reach the fallen helicopter. The mission to capture two lieutenants had just transformed into something far deadlier, a desperate fight for survival. Even as U.S. forces scrambled to secure the first crash site, tragedy struck again. Another Black Hawk, Super 64, piloted by Michael Durant, was circling to provide support when a rocket-propelled grenade tore through the sky. The explosion ripped into the aircraft, sending it spiraling down. With incredible skill, Durant managed to crash-land the helicopter upright, but he and his crew were trapped deep in hostile territory. Above, Super 62 hovered, its crew witnessing the mob already closing in. On board were two Delta Force snipers, Sergeant First Class Randy Schuhart and Master Sergeant Gary Gordon. Both men knew what was coming. Over the radio, they requested insertion to defend Durant. Command hesitated. The area was swarming with fighters. Dropping in was suicide. But Gordon and Schuhart insisted. Twice denied, they asked a third time, and finally, permission was granted. The two men fast roped down beside the wreckage, armed with nothing but their rifles and sheer resolve. They pulled Durant from the wreck and formed a desperate defensive ring, cutting down wave after wave of attackers. But ammunition ran low. Gordon was hit and killed. Schuhart pressed on, handing Durant his last rifle. Moments later, he too fell. Alone, wounded, and surrounded, Durant was taken prisoner. The two Delta snipers had given their lives in one of the most heroic last stands in modern military history. What was supposed to be a one-hour raid had now turned into a nightmare. With two Blackhawks down, the city of Mogadishu closed in like a trap. The Rangers and Delta operators tried to hold their positions, but the enemy seemed endless. Fighters poured in from alleys, mosques, and rooftops, armed with AK-47s, RPGs, and mounted machine guns. Every street corner became a kill zone. The American convoys struggled through the city's labyrinth, taking wrong turns, running into ambushes, and bleeding men with every mile. Inside the perimeter, the situation grew desperate. Medics worked frantically under fire. Ammunition ran dangerously low. The sun dipped over Mogadishu, and still the battle raged on. By nightfall, Rangers and Delta were trapped in hostile territory, pinned down near the crash sites. For hours, they fought in close quarters, exchanging fire in pitch-black streets, lit only by tracer rounds and burning wreckage. The cries of the wounded mixed with the roar of gunfire. Every block cost blood. What began as a quick strike had become a brutal siege. The Americans were cut off, surrounded, and outnumbered. Survival now depended on one thing: whether rescue forces could break through the city before it was too late. As the night dragged on, the trapped Rangers and Delta operators clung to survival. Then, at last, the call came. A rescue convoy was on its way. United Nations forces from Malaysia and Pakistan rolled out with armored personnel carriers and tanks, determined to break into Mogadishu's hell. But the city fought back. RPGs slammed into the lead vehicles, crippling them in the narrow streets. A Malaysian driver was killed instantly, others were wounded. Still, the convoy pressed forward, clearing roadblocks under relentless fire until finally, hours past midnight, they reached the first crash site. What they found at Super 64 was devastating. The helicopter was empty, its crew either dead or captured. The rescuers destroyed the wreck to deny it to the enemy, then pushed on toward the surviving Rangers and Delta at the other crash site. At dawn, the battered Americans were finally extracted, but there wasn't room for everyone on the armored vehicles. The uninjured were ordered to move on foot, a desperate dash through hostile streets. Side by side, they sprinted under fire, weaving through alleys and rubble. This run into gunfire would become infamous as the Mogadishu Mile. Exhausted, bloodied, but alive, the survivors finally reached safety. The longest night of their lives was over. When the guns finally fell silent, Mogadishu was littered with wreckage and blood. The battle had cost the United States 18 soldiers dead and more than 70 wounded, the heaviest casualty since Vietnam. For Somalia, the toll was far greater. Estimates of Somali dead range from hundreds to over 1,000, many of them civilians caught in the crossfire. But it was not just the numbers that shocked the world. Televised images of fallen American soldiers, stripped, mutilated, and dragged through the streets, seared themselves into public memory. For the U.S., the sight was unbearable. For Aidid's followers, it was a declaration of defiance. In Washington, the fallout was immediate. President Bill Clinton ordered U.S. combat forces withdrawn from Somalia within months. Secretary of Defense Les Aspin resigned. The mission, designed to stabilize a nation, ended in retreat. For the men who fought in Mogadishu, the scars ran deeper than headlines. They had witnessed courage, sacrifice, and brotherhood under impossible odds. Yet they also carried the weight of loss, knowing how close they had come to being abandoned entirely. The Battle of Mogadishu, Black Hawk Down, would stand as a symbol of modern warfare's brutality, of political miscalculation, and of soldiers thrust into a fight their nation no longer wished to finish. The Battle of Mogadishu was more than just a clash of soldiers in a foreign city. It was a turning point in modern warfare. For the Americans, it was a test of courage and sacrifice, where ordinary men were pushed to extraordinary limits. For Somalia, it was another chapter of suffering in a long civil war. Out of the smoke and blood emerged lessons that reshaped U.S. policy and military strategy for decades to come. Yet, beyond politics and history, the memory of those who fought and those who fell remains a haunting reminder of the true cost of war.